Hey y'all, in today's episode we're going to talk about the top 10 most accurate and realistic movies you can currently catch on Netflix. This list will include a handful of true stories that are told in a bone-chillingly accurate way, as well as some fictional stories that just have some insanely accurate elements in them. This video is sponsored by Magic Spoon, and I'll tell you more about them later in the video, but right now I want to start with my number 10 pick, which is a Netflix original movie based on a terror attack in Norway. In fact, it is the worst one in their history by far. In this domestic attack, 70 people were killed and hundreds were injured. And 22 July was directed by Paul Greengrass. He also directed my number 3 pick on this list because he's so good at bringing real events to life on screen. 22 July is told basically in 3 acts. You get the terror attack in the first bit of the movie, and it is really chilling to watch. It feels very real. Then you get the aftermath, them trying to figure out what happened, why, the recovery of some of the survivors, and then in the third act you get the trial, the court case, and you get to see kind of some of the workings of Norway's political system, which I'm not going to say is broken, but it's messy. And when you watch it, I do think it's worth noting that Norway has a population of less than 6 million, which is smaller than most states in the US, or about the size of a city like Atlanta, where I'm from. So this attack really turned the entire country upside down, and you get to see that kind of on full display in the movie. Really great performances by a bunch of unknowns, and again, the way Paul Greengrass directs movies like this, there's something about it that feels like it's happening. The only reason this is at the back of the list is because it is an exhausting 2.5 hours and can feel fairly dry, but as such, it kind of lives in between a documentary and a movie. Now, my next pick is one of my favorite little discoveries on Netflix in 2023 so far, but it is not based on a true story. However, it does depict credit card fraud in some fairly accurate ways in Emily the Criminal.
In the next hour, you will make 200 cash, but you will have to do something illegal. You won't be in danger, but you will be breaking the law.
Yo, you gonna pay for that?
Sorry?
In this movie, Aubrey Plaza plays a woman who's struggling to make ends meet and gets sucked into a credit card fraud scheme. And the story here is fantastic. She delivers a dynamite performance. The supporting cast is great. You really feel a lot of the tension. This is a great little indie thriller, but it also depicts credit card fraud in a very raw way, meaning it doesn't feel like a made-up product of Hollywood. It feels like a researched movie and feels like it's really putting you in the situation as well. As I said, there's some really tense moments in this movie, but if you like little indie thrillers, again, this is one of the best I've seen on Netflix all year. Now, director Ron Howard has done several movies that easily could have made this list, movies like Apollo 13. It's not on Netflix right now, but his Formula One movie, Rush, is on Netflix. Now, this is based on a true story, and it's just kind of an insanely underrated movie, at least here in the US, where Formula One is just not nearly as popular as it is in Europe. Chris Hemsworth is particularly good in this movie, and so is Daniel Brühl, most famous from Inglourious Basterds. And they played real-life Formula One rivals James Hunt and Niki Lauda. Their story is told very accurately in this movie, but the racing in this movie feels so real. I mean, there are real Formula One drivers driving real Formula One cars for a lot of the scenes, but perhaps even more importantly, when the movie was originally pre-screened for a bunch of Formula One drivers in Germany, it received a standing ovation, so right there you get a solid stamp of approval on Rush. Speaking of things that are the real deal, it's a great time to mention today's sponsor, Magic Spoon, which is a delicious, high-protein treat that tastes just like you remember when you were a kid. Each bowl of Magic Spoon has 4 to 5 grams of net carbs and 14 to 15 grams of protein with 0 grams of sugar and only 140 calories. Magic Spoon is also keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, and soy-free. I mean, it really is cereal reinvented. Now, personally, I benefit greatly from a high-protein, low-carb diet, but I still get cravings sometimes, especially late at night. And Magic Spoon is a guilt-free way for me to load up on protein before bed, and it tastes just like the cereal I remember when I was a kid. My two favorite flavors though are the fruity one, which tastes very familiar, and the frosted, which I don't have because I ate all of it. But both of those come in the variety pack along with cocoa and peanut butter, which are both delicious as well. Click the link in the description below and use the code FLICK to save $5 off any order. Or go to magicspoon.com/flick. Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's actually backed by a 100% happiness guarantee. So if you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. So click that link below or use the code FLICK for $5 off, or just go to magicspoon.com/flick to save $5. It's a great deal and a great product, but speaking of great stuff, let's move on with the rest of the movies on this list. Now, the landscape of the drug war looks very different today than it did back in the early 2000s, but one of the most accurate drug movies from that era, really about the drug war, has got to be Traffic. Now, not only is this a fantastic crime movie with just some epic storylines that interweave, and you get several different character arcs in this movie. You get an addict, drug dealers, smugglers, the US drug czar, played by Michael Douglas. I mean, Traffic manages to cover a lot of bases and expose you to a lot of the inner workings of the drug trade, from their creation all the way through their abuse, and it's just expertly done. Directed by Steven Soderbergh. Each storyline has its own color palette, which is all done with natural light and different cameras, giving this movie an amazing look, but also sort of segmenting out the different storylines. I will say Traffic makes you bite off a lot more than you can chew in one sitting. There's so many different stories, it's hard to invest in all of them in one sitting, and really, each one of these could have been plucked out and turned into its own movie. However, as it stands, this is still maybe not the most entertaining movie about the drug trade, but certainly one of the most accurate. I'm sure some of you probably guessed there will be a couple of war movies on this list, and right now I've got a World War I Netflix original movie that actually got nominated for some big-time awards this past year, All Quiet on the Western Front. In this movie, you follow a young, idealistic German soldier who is excited to join the war until he sees the real horrors of war, and this movie is just a top-notch Netflix original production. So often, Netflix original movies feel kind of like premium made-for-TV movies, but not solid films that will last over time, and All Quiet on the Western Front is an exception to that rule. This is top-notch filmmaking with some insanely realistic battle sequences, much more realistic than most other war movies you'll find on Netflix. Now, even though this depicts war in a realistic way, it is a work of fiction. This was based on the famous novel that was released in 1929. They would then make a movie by the same title in 1930, which is a solid and classic war movie. But for an updated version on that book, this is easily one of the best World War I movies to have been released since the original. Now, fair warning, my next pick on this list is far and away one of the most disturbing movies I've ever seen on Netflix. Holy Spider is loosely based on true events that happened in Iran in the early 2000s. Now, the story here is a work of fiction, the characters are made up, but it accurately depicts what life is like for women in Iran. And if that weren't upsetting enough, Holy Spider is about a serial killer who is systematically taking out prostitutes on the streets of an Iranian city. And on top of that, this movie places you with the killer for all of the kills. Now, this is a murder mystery type of a movie where the main character is a female journalist just trying to navigate these insanely muddy waters and figure out what's happening, because law enforcement really has no interest in catching this guy. As far as they're concerned, he's cleaning up the streets. Like I said, it's rough stuff, and I did not just pick this movie because the murders are so graphic, even though they definitely are. I'm telling you, this is a stomach-turning movie, but like I said, the movie also really does an amazing job of depicting what life is like for women inside this culture. It's something I think a lot of people need to expose themselves to. I really don't think a lot of people are aware of how rough it can really be. I mean, rough is not really the word to describe it, but if you are easily disturbed, this is not going to be the movie for you. I could say the same thing about my next pick, which is still, to this day, one of the best Netflix original movies ever created, even though it was one of the first, Beasts of No Nation.
Then when you are ready, you calm down so, well, into the flesh. You have tried melon before? Melon is, but this is not a melon. I said, shut your mouth.
This was actually written and directed by Cary Joji Fukunaga, who's most famous for directing the first season of True Detective, and this is probably his second best work ever. Now, this is not based on any real events, but it accurately depicts the life of a child soldier in an unnamed African country. Beasts of No Nation does a great job of putting you in the place of this young boy named Agu. Everything you see is from his perspective, so as he's being recruited as a child soldier, it looks like a great place to be, or at least compared to his other options. And then, just like All Quiet on the Western Front, he begins to see the horrors of this life that he's going down. Idris Elba does an amazing job in this movie. I'm a big fan of his. This is easily one of his strongest performances of all time. There's amazing filmmaking in this movie as well. And because it's so accurate and because it's about child soldiers, there are some rough moments in this movie, but again, it's all brought to life by an amazing filmmaker. Now, I promised that director Paul Greengrass took my number 3 spot on this list. He's most famous for movies like United 93, The Bourne Ultimatum, and News of the World, but I happen to think that Captain Phillips is far and away his best film. Now, if you've never seen this movie, I can promise you it is miles more compelling than the trailers might have suggested, and the trailers look insanely compelling. If you did not know the full story of what happens with Captain Phillips, you need to watch this movie. It really is a harrowing story that deserves to be watched, and I honestly think Paul Greengrass is the perfect director to do a movie like this. I can't think of anyone who would have done this better. Just like some of the other movies on this list, it's so accurate, it feels like it's really happening, and as such, the tension feels insanely raw. And I always love Tom Hanks being kind of the goofy character. He does that great, but the guy really is an amazing actor, and he really does kind of become this guy. And even though he's one of the most famous people in the world, by the end of the movie, you see Captain Phillips, you don't see Tom Hanks. So this is just another one that's just a great example of everyone doing killer work in order to make an experience happen that wouldn't have happened otherwise. I mean, there's no other way you could even get a taste of what a situation like that might be like without an excellent film like this. Speaking of getting a taste for some real-life harrowing situations, my next pick is one of the most intense war movies I've ever seen still to this date, Black Hawk Down. I remember I was 17 when I saw this in a theater, and we were on the brink of war in 2001, and this movie felt insanely real to me. It's directed by Ridley Scott, and as far as his movies go, this is easily one of the most accurate. In fact, there's a book based on this event, there's a documentary, and the movie follows the true story very closely. They changed the sequence of some things in order to make the movie flow, and then they add some big explosions and things at the end that really don't make a whole lot of sense just to Hollywood it up for no good reason, but everything else depicted in this movie, it feels insanely accurate. And not just the way it looks, the way it's paced out, the fast, frenetic nature of this situation, all feels like it's unfolding in real time. It's not. The movie's just over 2 hours and the event itself lasted an entire day, but it still gets your heart pumping and has that raw feel. Now, I never served in the military and have certainly never been in a situation like that, but if you have, for real, let me know how accurate Black Hawk Down is in the comments, and if there's any other movies that you think are maybe more accurate. I will check the comments for those. But then, believe it or not, my number 1 pick is not based on true events, well, rather loosely based on some true events, but is one of the most realistic crime movies ever put on film, Michael Mann's Heat. Now, I know a lot of people love this movie because it's just a fantastic gangster movie. You get Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. There's a famous scene with them in the diner, and just everybody's dynamite. And this movie's really famous for looking fantastic. I've heard multiple filmmakers say that Los Angeles is typically an ugly city on film, and Heat was really the first movie to make it look stunning. In fact, the look of Heat is still mimicked today, but that's not why I put it on this list. I put it on the list because of how accurately it depicts this type of organized crime in a lot of different aspects. How they find jobs, how they carry them out, how they plan them, how law enforcement pursues them, all done almost to a T with this movie. In addition to that, the epic bank heist shootout in this movie is still, to this day, one of the most accurate shootouts in movie history, if not still the most accurate. You go watch any action movie and the gunfire is just pop, 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 it's sound effects. In the shootout in Heat, there are microphones all over the street, and you're actually hearing the eardrum-busting sound of these automatic weapons echoing off of all the glass office buildings. It sounds and looks so insanely real. I've even heard the Marines will show new recruits this shootout because it accurately shows how to retreat under fire and change magazines under fire. Hard to get much more accurate than that, but that is the list. The full list can be found in the top pinned comment, as always, on the channel. Thanks again to Magic Spoon for sponsoring another video. Go check out that link in the description below, but I will keep making these videos as long as you keep watching them.